Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys just a little bit about a study that one of my viewers linked to me, and he wanted me to discuss it a little bit. And so I thought I would go ahead and do that because it's an interesting study, because I've talked about in the past that there have been studies done here in the US on testosterone and people who don't train, and they gain tremendous amounts of muscle. And something I have pointed out based on that is that we don't have a lot of data to really show what training does when added to anabolics. And one of the things I have said, though, is that my observations over the years are that the way that someone trains, as far as just hypertrophy, we're not talking about strength, we're not talking about powerlifting, we're not talking about strength sports, we're talking about purely cosmetic purposes. That as the amount of stuff that people put into their body goes up, the less what they do in the gym seems to matter for gains, for getting bigger, for gaining muscle. It really doesn't matter. And I know all these silly ass bodybuilders, they love to say, well, you still got to train hard. And then you watch Flex Wheeler, considered to have been one of the greatest bodybuilders in my lifetime from an aesthetics perspective, right? Flex Wheeler, guy almost won the Olympia a couple times. Everyone prized him for his proportions and symmetry and aesthetics in the whole bodybuilding world. The guy was one of the laziest people I've ever seen in the gym in my entire life. Like, he trained like a 70-year-old man. And if you watched any of his old training videos that he put out back on VHS and stuff back in the 90s, there are 60 and 70-year-old men in the gym all the time who train at his level. You see that in every gym, right? What he did was he trained like an old man who was beat up, just doing lightweight lat pull downs and cables and stuff all the time. That's all he did. And nothing was ever heavy. I mean, it's not like he was using the whole stack for reps either on things, like 80-pound lat pull downs for high reps, and that's, his back growth. And I think that kind of highlights the point of people see things like that. And that's a guy who admitted that he'd started using stuff 2 weeks after he started training as a teenager, right? So you see examples like that, and people should start to realize at a certain point, well, I don't know if you do have to train that hard in the whole bodybuilding thing, just to make gains. Once guys start slapping 5 and 6 and 7 drug cocktails together and putting them in their body, the way you train doesn't matter as much. And I mean, another perfect example, like look at even Kai Green. I brought that up the other day. I mean, Kai Green is monstrous. Now, granted, he's really, really short. And I know people have argued with me, or he's not as short as you say he is. I've stood next to him. There is no way that guy's like 5'7", 5'8". If he is, then I would have to be over 6 feet tall. Okay, I'm just going to throw that out there, and I'm not. So, that guy is monstrously big, though, but watch how he trains. And it's not that he's not capable of lifting heavy weight. It's just that he chooses not to. And I mean, even his reps and sets. People say, well, he's doing high reps. Yeah, but he could be doing high reps with 3 times as much weight also. And literally, if most of us out here who have built a solid base were to be training clean or in the normal testosterone range and were to do what he does in the gym, we would shrink. We would literally start losing muscle after a month or so, right? We would actually start losing muscle tissue if we trained the way that he trained. I would. There's no way I could maintain my back size and everything else and shoulders and everything with what he does. I couldn't do it without drugs. Just on TRT, there's no way. No way I could maintain my size if I did what he does. And so we see the things like that, and then we say, okay, maybe the training doesn't matter that much when people start using large amounts of stuff. But we do have a study using moderate amounts, because remember, we did a study before showing that at 600 milligrams of test, when we saw it produced more muscle growth than weightlifting does for guys just sitting on their butt. And I'm talking guys who had already trained. They had at least a year of continual weight training experience, and they took them out of the gym and had them use stuff, and they gained more muscle than noobs usually gain in 5 months in the gym, over a 20-week cycle. So this one, we've got some comparisons of 40-something young men who they put into 4 groups. They put a placebo with no exercise, no testosterone. Then they did a testosterone with no exercise, and a placebo, which was exercise and no testosterone, and then testosterone plus exercise. And interestingly enough, you start looking at the fat-free mass. That's all we care about, is that fat-free mass, right? We saw, less than a kilo of gain in the 10 weeks in the placebo group. They did gain some muscle. That does happen. That was their average. The testosterone group gained around, it looks like 3.2 kilograms of fat-free mass. Now, in 10 weeks, guys, that is pretty ridiculous. All right, you don't usually gain that from training in the gym, as we see in the next placebo group. You look at the next placebo group, and they didn't gain as much, because let's put that into pounds. 3.2 kilograms is 7 pounds of muscle in 10 weeks with no training. By comparison, the 10 weeks to exercise group, which were put on a training program but no testosterone, they gained 2 kilos of muscle. All right, that's 4.4 pounds. In other words, the testosterone group gained 3 more pounds of muscle in 10 weeks with no exercise than the exercise group did. Now, where the numbers got skewed, and this is what I don't like, is that we can't call this random. And this is the only big problem I have with this study, because you take the testosterone plus exercise group, and yes, they obviously made the most gains, but you guys see the problem with the starting point? They had 4 kilograms less muscle on their body. Now, we don't know how they normalized that for height, but if you got 4 kilos, that's about 9 pounds of muscle less on average in that group versus the other testosterone group. They should be able to gain more muscle in the same time period. Unfortunately, that skews the results tremendously. I would rather have seen that placebo group and the testosterone and exercise group be compared with a testosterone. They should have flipped those. And do you know why? Because they're starting at the same size. Only 0.2 kilograms different fat-free mass. That would have been a better comparison, because I feel like, unfortunately, it skewed the results. Now, I always tell people that I think, based on my observations, that when people add stuff into the mix, the stuff they take will account for most of their gains. And I don't believe there's a synergy. I believe it's an additive effect. If you train hard enough to gain 1 pound of muscle in 3 months and you add a bunch of gear to it, you will gain 1 extra pound of muscle from your training, versus if you hadn't trained at all and just used the stuff. And I honestly believe that. And this study, in a way, kind of confirms that. It does seem to skew it slightly because the guy started smaller. And so that's the biggest flaw. I've seen that put in flaws on just training methods. It's like when one of the groups starts with a lot less muscle than another. That's usually one of the things that they tear it apart in the results in the peer review later when other people review it and look at it, because it's not an even comparison, because they obviously started smaller. And the smaller you are, the more potential you have to gain muscle. Because, yeah, we could look at that and say the testosterone plus exercise group did gain more muscle. They did gain more muscle. In fact, it was, I'm going to do the math real quick. They gained, 6.1 kilos of muscle versus around 4.1. I mean, that's 2 extra kilos of muscle by adding the exercise in, which is about the same thing we saw from the placebo group. So, I mean, it kind of keeps in line with that. But the downside to that is that it doesn't give us a valid comparison. But what we can conclude based upon that is that they still gained more muscle from the stuff they were taking than they gained from the exercise, right? Because the exercise group on the same routine as them gained 2 kilograms of muscle, right? Well, they gained 6.1 with the stuff added in. They gained 3 times the muscle mass that the training group did. And they started smaller. So their training should have stimulated more muscle growth anyways, right? Because the smaller you are, the more muscle you can gain per month relative to your potential. But the point is that clearly the 600 milligrams of testosterone, which is considered extremely conservative by modern standards, and yes, my TRT is considerably less than that. Considerably less. It's like a fourth of that. So 600 is pretty low by modern standards, yet they gained 3 times as much muscle as the exercise group, and they only gained really a couple kilos more muscle than just the testosterone and sitting on their ass group. So when you look at it from this perspective, when you can see this data and realize that the testosterone alone puts double the muscle on a sedentary person, people who just don't train versus people who are actually training, and then you go look and the people who are on the testosterone plus training gain 3 times the muscle mass that the training group did when they're put on the same routine. When guys stand around and say, oh, yeah, the way I train really matters, it affects my results massively when I'm blasting huge amounts of stuff, what these bodybuilders and stuff tell you, I think it's fair to say that they're completely full of it. They're full of it. The way that they train, does it matter? Yeah, it probably does affect it a little bit. It certainly affects it. But when people start putting these anabolic cocktails into their body, when you start seeing the data like this, when they claim that the way that they train is the biggest factor in their size, it's not even close by a long shot. In fact, the way that they train may not even meaningfully affect their results. It may not even meaningfully affect the amount of muscle that they gained at a certain threshold. And I think that's a reasonable extrapolation of the data. So, again, all these enhanced bodybuilders, we can laugh about this when they talk about like the way that they train is how they got where they are. Okay, whatever, guys. Do you show them stuff like this and then you realize some of them are using 10 times the amount using this study? Yeah, all right, bro. Yeah, your concentration curls are totally the reason you added that extra inch to your bicep. That's what it is. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.